So recently I rewatched the 2013 film Elysium, and because it's been about 10 years since it released, I figured I'd make a video about my retrospective observations. Elysium is a futuristic dystopia wherein the world's wealthiest people leave behind a decaying, polluted Earth and set up shop on a giant, lush, clean, and technologically super advanced space station, complete with magical beds that cure cancer and rebuild body parts. The name Elysium comes from what the ancient Greeks called the Elysian Fields. Basically, they were a Greek Valhalla, heaven if we want to simplify things even further. Matt Damon, of all people, plays an orphan boy named Max who's raised by a Hispanic nun in Los Angeles, which honestly looks like just another Latin American shantytown with trash and dust everywhere. It's almost as if the film were saying that Mexicans will invariably turn the U.S. into a shithole. Of course, the film, if anything, is saying that white prosperity is caused by the deprivation of brown people. At the film's outset, Matt Damon is all grown up and is heading out from his shanty home to work. He displays how native he is by code switching between Spanish and English with local children. Then he gets beat up by the end result of DARPA's joint venture with Boston Dynamics. Although the robots have Policia written on their heads, they all insist on speaking English to Matt Damon. I guess they weren't falling for the Hispanic LARP either. Now that Max's arm is broken, he has to go to a hospital where he flirts with his childhood Latina love interest. Of course, she's a virtuous nurse who initially turns down his advances but reluctantly agrees to have coffee with him later. This may be a Chicano dystopia, but we're going to still adhere to quaint Anglo dating norms. Max then goes to see his parole officer, which is also an automated robot. There are Spanish language instructions written on it, and it's been vandalized with what I assume are Mexican gang signs. Curiously, despite LA being mostly Mexican now, the authorities still chose to make the robot look white and dressed it like a 1980s FBI agent. The robot extends Max's probation by 8 months for his little incident with the RoboCops earlier. Afterwards, Max finally gets to his job building robots for rich people. Let's note, however, that he had a run-in with the police, got a cast set on his broken arm, and met with his parole officer all before noon. That's some serious bureaucratic efficiency. Somehow, this dystopian healthcare system functions more smoothly than the modern-day NHS or Canadian Medicare, which is now starting to suggest euthanasia as a solution to poverty. The film then flashes to lush scenes on Elysium, wherein Jodie Foster, the director of Elysium Security, is speaking French with other good-looking white people. Foster then notices that 3 spaceships full of ugly brown people are attempting to illegally migrate to Elysium. She quickly leaps into action and calls a white mercenary back on Earth, who promptly begins shooting ground-to-air missiles at the shuttles. 2 of the 3 shuttles are destroyed, but one evades and manages to land on some rich person's lawn. A brown mother quickly emerges and carries her sickly child to a magical medical bed that heals all her ailments. But then, all the refugees are rounded up and deported by Elysium's robot military force. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Max is busy building these very robots when he gets irradiated after an evil supervisor threatens to fire him if he doesn't crawl into a decontamination chamber to remove an obstruction from the doorway. There's a flashback of little white Matt Damon speaking in Spanish to his Hispanic nun mother about how all he wants to do is live on Elysium, and in response, she gives him a locket with a picture of Earth inside it so that Max never forgets where he comes from. Now, perhaps the filmmakers cast Matt Damon as super cool gringo hispano because they felt that was the only way that the white audience could sympathize with the plight of brown people. But it was probably also a way for masochistic white liberals to vicariously live out a going native fantasy. Other films that do this are Dances with Wolves and Avatar, which is basically Dances with Wolves in space. However, unlike the white characters of these films who actually give up modernity to live amongst the noble savages, the white people who make these films are millionaires who live in gated, almost entirely white communities. In any case, production in the rich people factory stops, and super white CEO man is very upset about it. He asks super mean white manager guy why. Manager guy begins to explain, but CEO man instructs him not to breathe on him. Then he asks if irradiated Matt Damon's skin is going to fall off or something, and that he doesn't want to replace the bedding in there. Now, I realize that the filmmakers here had limited time to convey that this is all a really inhumane society implicitly run by white people, but the scene is still terribly awkward and ham-fisted. A medical robot then explains to Matt Damon that he's gonna die in 5 days due to organ failure, and coldly tosses a bottle of magic pills on his person that will keep him functioning until then. The film then pivots back to Elysium, where Jodie Foster is reprimanded by Elysium's Indian president, who is named Patel. That's right. Comparatively more humane Indian Patel guy then brings up and questions Jodie Foster's usage of the super white evil mercenary Kruger, who has a long criminal record of rapes, kidnappings, murders, etc. In response, Jodie Foster begins plotting a coup with super white CEO Man against comparatively more humane Indian Patel guy. CEO Man then writes a program that will put all of Elysium under cruel French-speaking Jodie Foster's control and install her as president. But now that Max has been irradiated, he has to find a way to get to Elysium where he can use the magical cure-all medical beds. But, unfortunately, travel to and from Elysium is cruelly restricted to citizens. So Max turns to an equivalent of a coyote on the American-Mexican border, some guy named Spider. Spider needs Max to hijack a space shuttle carrying CEO Man, who has magical Elysium data. CEO Man gets shot, though, and Max has to download the data to his own brain to save it. Max then runs around for a while, fighting off mercenaries Jodie Foster sends to retrieve the stolen data, because said data is central to her plot to overthrow the comparatively more humane Indian Patel guy. Eventually, Max and the Coyote end up on Elysium after realizing that CEO Man's data can be used to magically turn Mexicans into Americans. Well, I mean, Elysians, thereby granting them access to all of white people's magically endless resources and technology that were acquired through the deprivation of everyone else. Max and Spider battle their way past super evil white mercenary guy who ends up murdering Jodie Foster, aka evil white posh French-speaking Karen. Max and Spider finally arrive at a control room and are about to upload the magical identity-changing data when they realize Max won't survive the transfer from his brain. So, naturally, the super virtuous code-switching white man, raised by a Hispanic nun in Los Angeles, sacrifices himself to ensure that millions of brown people can now get the magic papers to become Americans. I mean, Elysians. Now, not all films must have a flawlessly coherent and logical plot, but Elysium falls into a long tradition of white masochistic films that are very juvenile and irresponsible. These sorts of films don't really explore their stated motifs of environmentalism, immigration, or inequality in any sort of productive way. In fact, it's all dangerously counterproductive. It not only massages the idea that white society is oppressive, but also that white flight is oppressive. That is, whenever white people pack up and flee diversity, that is basically a form of Elysium-like behavior. Enter Neil Blomkamp, the writer and director of Elysium. He was born and raised in Johannesburg. Clearly, he was very much influenced by the wealth disparities of post-apartheid South Africa. But, even so, he did not embrace the noble savage. He did not try to become a Zulu warrior. Au contraire, he packed up and moved to Vancouver when he was 18 and never looked back.